Hey, what's up, daddy-os and daddy-ettes? There's a lot of ungroovy cats out there not hip to the fact that there are actually some really good Stephen King adaptations made into movies. A lot of ungroovy fellas out there spreading that lie, man. Trucking all night, telling people that there aren't any Stephen King adaptations worth seeing. I say that's a bunch of malarkey, brother. Let me hip you to the fact of five plus an honorable mention of the most essential Stephen King movies, even though there's a lot in this category, one of the strongest I've ever done. All right, let's get going. This is the first King story to be set in the fictional town of Castle Rock, Maine. Honorable mention, The Dead Zone. Alright, there were so many good movies left over after I picked my five that I was really struck for what to stick in here. I almost put Castle Rock in, which is a TV show kind of similar to Fargo, where they take the essence of Stephen King and put it into a story instead of actually taking Stephen King's stories. So I would recommend that, but also, Cujo, Christine, Carrie, The Running Man. All those got left off this list. So as you can see, Stephen King's strong, man. So I'm going to go with The Dead Zone. It's a personal favorite. Directed by David Cronenberg. It stars Christopher Walken as a guy who, on the night he gets engaged and he's totally in love and his life's going to be perfect, he gets into a car wreck and wakes up several years later and the rest of the world's moved on. But to him, it's like one day later and he suddenly has a psychic ability to see the future and help solve crimes. So it's crazy and out there, man. The villain in this film won the Oscar for Best Actress. Number 5, Misery. This is obviously sort of a personal story to King, that he puts himself into the main character. Well, not the main character, but at least the author who's caught in bed being tortured by his number one fan. So Kathy Bates and James Caan. This really kind of made Kathy Bates, but James Caan, he sort of makes a comeback in this. So directed by our buddy Meathead, Rob Reiner. For some reason, he directs Stephen King pretty much better than anybody. That new guy does a good job, Mike Flanagan, but Meathead for sure. He kicks butt when it comes to Stephen King. So Misery is a definite must-see. It's been made into a stage play. The book is great. It's all different in its tellings, but it's wonderful every time I see it. This is the only George Romero film to open at number 1 at the box office. Number 4, Creepshow. George Romero and Stephen King became buddies, like minds, birds of a feather kind of a thing. So I think they used to sit around and smoke a bunch of grass, and they decided to do a tribute to old EC horror comics, basically the same thing Tales from the Crypt did. And then Romero showed Tales from the Dark Side and that show Monsters. They all had sort of that same feeling of tribute to that old horror that was hidden inside comic books away from the parents, where they just thought you were reading some stupid superhero magazine, but really it was full of, ghouls and goblins and people rising up from the dead and all that. So this anthology movie is epic. It gives a bunch of some actors fresh starts, but it also dusts off old actors. The whole scene with the cockroaches, if you've ever seen that stays with you for the rest of your life. So trigger warning if you got a bug thing, but yeah, Creepshow, a classic. Rather than Castle Rock, Maine, this film is set in Castle Rock, Oregon. Number 3, Stand By Me. Once again, Rob Reiner. This guy knows how to tell the Stephen King story. You gotta tell the human side first. It's like a bad drama almost. And then when something awful happens, it's extra bad because you've learned to care about these people in the movie or the story, you know. Rob Reiner really understands the drama side of it. In this movie, Stand By Me, it's about 4 kids on their way to find a dead body because they think if they find a dead body and alert the media, they'll be famous somehow. And instead, it's just a story about, you know, growing up and growing towards, you know, understanding death and, you know, your life and the long journey that it is and all that stuff. So it's really fantastically acted. All the kids in it do a great job, and it just feels... I wasn't alive during the 1950s, but when I think of the 1950s, I think of Stand By Me. This movie was nominated for 2 Razzies, Worst Actress and Worst Director. Number 2, The Shining. Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece is just that, Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece. He used to call Stephen King in the middle of the night and wake him up and ask him all sorts of questions, and in this adaptation, he really understood what King was telling with his story and then just threw a bunch of it right out the window. Even though King didn't like it because Kubrick had changed so much and told his own story, which wasn't the story King wanted to tell. You know, that this hotel was supposed to drive Jack Torrance insane, but in the, you know, the Kubrick version, it feels kind of like Jack Nicholson's a little off when the movie starts. So it's hard to say this is a 100% King movie, but also it's you can watch it over and over. It's endlessly fascinating. Kubrick at his, you know, peak, it's the pinnacle of his powers. He's a Jedi of film at this point. So even something like a silly little, you know, horror story about some people trapped in a haunted house or a haunted hotel, it's just mesmerizing, and that's how you would describe this movie. It's arguably, you know, right up there with 2001 is one of the most mesmerizing movies you've ever seen. This movie was nominated for 7 Oscars, including Best Picture. It won none. And if The Shining's number 2, then that could only mean number 1 is Shawshank Redemption. Stephen King's masterpiece, Frank Darabont's masterpiece. It's the highest rated movie on IMDb, I believe. It's, you know, universal approval. The people who don't like that movie seem to kind of have, like, they're trying to be contrarian. Pretty much everyone else, there's something in there that they like, you know, whether it's how horrible it is to be in prison or how uplifting it is to keep the human spirit alive, the years that pass while this man is in prison, and the story that gets told with corruption and power, and, you know, the Alfred Hitchcock thing with the wrongly accused man, or is he the wrongly accused man? And just, it's a story that feels so epic, you know. And no matter when you jump in, you can just pick up from where it is, almost like Goodfellas or something. It's one of the best movies ever made, and, you know, that's one of the reasons it makes me laugh that people think Stephen King movies are, you know, they can't adapt them. It's, you know, this right here is a classic example of course they could adapt Stephen King. It's just people think of Stephen King as a horror director, or a horror writer, I should say. So when his films and stories aren't necessarily horror, it throws people off and like, that wasn't scary. But really, I think of Stephen King more like a Twilight Zone extension. And, you know, if you look at each story or each movie or whatever, like an episode of The Twilight Zone, like, oh, did you ever see the one about the lady who's trapped in her car with the dog outside? Or did you ever see the one about the guy in the future who gets put in the game show where he has to run away from killers, you know, for the reality TV crowd? You know, if you look at them like those individual episodes, yeah, Stephen King's fantastic. But if you say he's supposed to be this pinnacle of horror and, you know, that's what scary is, then nah, Stephen King lets down. But I'm a big fan of the man, and I think this list kind of demonstrates how, you know, underappreciated him and the movies that have been adapted from his works are. I mean, granted, there's like 100 of them because he's Stephen King and he's one of the most prolific writers ever. So, you know, 90% of all his movies suck. But that 10% that they get right is just perfect. All right, brother, you take it easy, man. You hang loose and don't let the gobbledygooks catch up with you, brother.